with massive emotion in the market. This is why I personally like to look at the opportunities we have when it comes to investing around the world. We're recently looking at some real estate here in Colombia, and today I'd really like to zoom out and help you understand the bird's eye view perspective of the markets, some indicators that I've recently added to this kind of list, really understanding what's going on in the geopolitical sense and kind of everything from the macro perspective. That's the focus of today's video, along with a couple picks when it comes to the commodity sector and some interesting companies I'm actually looking forward to their new developments in the coming years. So one of these charts that I like to watch here is the Russian ruble in the euro charts. I think this is incredibly important, especially as kind of this whole tensions increase between Russia and NATO and the whole Ukraine conflict. When it comes to actually Biden announcing yesterday that he's putting around 8,500 troops unprepared to deploy. So they haven't actually left the United States, but they are on this waiting list. So I think that's very important to understand, putting them on standby and really kind of announcing this. I covered this whole situation, and I really think that the interesting thing here that not a lot of people are looking at is Europe's kind of heavy dependence on Russia when it comes to gas and natural energy. So I think this is very, very important to understand. So Europe is one of the regions that is most dependent on gas. You supply over a fifth of the energy, but its most common supply outside of the EU comes from Russia. So this is massive. It's kind of this chip that Russia has to play in this whole situation, because obviously the whole European Union is part of NATO. And I think when it comes to this, if you're looking at non-violent kind of shifts in this whole conflict, that's one thing that Russia could kind of pull out their trump card, if you will, and play that. So this video is called Russia-Ukraine conflict. I have it linked down below in the description. But if we go back here to the Russian ruble chart, I also like to compare this to the S&P. So this is very interesting when you're looking at this kind of on shorter time frames. So if we zoom in here a little bit, you can kind of see the correlation here. I think this is very interesting, kind of as a little bit of a leading indicator of what's going on there. And also looking at pricing the Russian ruble as kind of fear increases in the market. So beyond this, I would also like to point out the US dollar index is very important to understand. So typically as the overall strength of the dollar increases, we see a decline in asset prices because that's what they're valued in, global reserve currency. I always like to watch that. Along with this, the 10-year Treasury yield, typically a flat 10-year Treasury yield. So what we saw, let's see, so just back here, this was kind of the best case scenario for assets, but this rising 10-year Treasury yield is typically asset negative. That's very important to understand. Also, oil prices are very important to kind of understand for the commodities markets and for emerging market countries. Typically, as oil price increases, we're looking at the crude oil chart. So we could pull that up here, right here. We could go to crude, and as crude increases, typically what we would see is a overall increase in the other assets across the market. So we are seeing this right now. Obviously, that's kind of a bigger picture thing. Along with this, I do want to mention this increased interest in this gold shares. So right here, this is the biggest inflow it's had. And typically, I don't like to have this when it comes to exposure to the commodity markets. When it comes to precious metals, gold and silver, I think the best way of doing this is either mining companies, the people that are producing these assets, or the actual physical bullion, holding that yourself. You want that in a private vault, typically in a country that has a lot of economic kind of fairness, a country that doesn't have a past history of actually taking your gold from you, aka the US and a lot of other countries around the world. Singapore is a great place for this, in my personal opinion. There are some other ones around the world, but I think that's a great option if you're interested in this. I also have a couple of videos on kind of gold in the commodity markets. That's a playlist down below in the description. But yeah, this article is actually quite interesting. So they talk about, it's here on Bloomberg, which is really annoying with all the ads, so I'll kind of zoom in here. So gold just got very bullish, a sign from investors who are returning to the precious metal in a big way. SPDR Gold Shares, the largest bullion-backed exchange-traded fund, on Friday recorded its biggest net inflow in dollars terms since the listing in 2004, worth about $1.63 billion. Changes in ETF holdings are monitored as a gauge for investors' interest in long-term bets on the gold. So again, this is typically, we're not seeing who's investing in kind of large ETFs like this of gold is funds, right? So when funds are looking at this, it's harder for them to put a massive amount of money in things like bullion and actually secure that in a vault. They typically do this on a personal basis, but when a massive company is looking at, okay, how can we kind of hedge against what's going on in the market today if we were going to see this massive recession, which I personally have been talking about for a while. I do think we're in a massive kind of overall bubble. I think we probably will have a little bit of an increase here in the medium short term. But at the end of the day, I think we're clearly over leveraged in a lot of different asset classes. This is why I've talked a lot about things of inflation hedge assets. But it's very important to understand that commodities really haven't had their run. That's why I also like to look at the daily metals prices, another thing on my Market Watch tab here. So looking at aluminum, cobalt, copper, gold, iron ore, and just really tracking this on a day-to-day basis to kind of see these different changes. Looking at, okay, what are the plays like lithium and uranium that I've talked a lot about over the past year that have done quite well, and I think will do even better in the coming years as there's kind of more of this kind of increased demand and really tight supply. The supply is the biggest thing, especially with uranium. That's the whole situation with Kazakhstan being the #1 producer of uranium. I also talked about that in a recent video. But if we move beyond that, another thing I like to watch here is global overviews of countries. So you can see different things like interest rates, inflation rates, unemployment rates, budgets, debt to GDP, which is incredibly important. That's also very interesting when it comes to Russia, because Russia is actually doing very, very well when it comes to that, especially when you compare that with the U.S. So Russia is one of these countries that is very, very wealthy when you're looking at just the overall kind of natural resources they have to offer to the world. And I think obviously in a recession, that's where people go to. You know, in a recession, you can't necessarily go and sell your crypto very easily, but a lot of people look to these things where they're really important for supply chain issues, and I think that's so important to understand with Russia. I do personally like the investment narrative there. Beyond this, we're looking at the fear and greed index here, extreme fear in the crypto markets. We're looking at the Bitcoin chart. I did make a little short position here recently that was in profits. Also, I wanted to mention this. So if you've watched the Global TA playlist, I refuse to pay for TradingView. I refuse. But let's see. So if you watch the Global TA playlist, you'll understand my kind of view on technical analysis. It's this 8-part series where I go over all things markets, and basically it breaks down everything you need to know when it comes to understanding charts, and I really go into detail on these things. And actually these lines here, it's been interesting because the prices have really bounced off these, but these are actually drawn a long time ago. All these lines, if you watch this channel, a year ago, they were drawn all back here, really. So we've seen all these price reactions off these, and I just made a simple short position a couple of days ago based off these things and did very, very well. And that actually, I used some of that short position to add to my long-term portfolio. So before I continue on, I do have to mention today's sponsor, Gold Secured Currency by Apollo Fintech, GSX. This is basically combining cryptocurrency blockchain assets with gold-backed securities. So they actually have physical mines, and they really combine these two things to provide a very interesting solution. They also have a lot of other things to offer. I have a full video on why I partnered up with Apollo Fintech, link down below in the description, as well as a link to GSX if you're interested in this. It's a really great inflation hedge right now, especially if you're kind of looking to diversify in the crypto markets. It's kind of gain exposure to an asset class that you might not already have exposure to currently. So they talk about these different things, how it's actually backed by a stablecoin, but also gold and land mineral rights. Combination of best things about a stablecoin and an investment coin. They have a burn, they have redeemable, and it's done quite well. So definitely check out GSX. I'll do much more with Apollo Fintech down the road, but back to the Bitcoin chart. So I did make this little short position. I'm also potentially looking at another one here of it dropping closer to this $30,000 range. So if we're looking at this, what I would personally be looking for is just a simple situation like this. You could get a bit more complex. Again, watch the Global TA series if you're looking for a bit of a more in-depth analysis of how these things would work. I basically break down everything you would need to know there. But let's go to this arrow right here. I did want to point this out. So let's say right here, Bitcoin would drop below this line, kind of touch this Bollinger Band and test this. That's where I would look for a bearish engulfing candle and set up a little short position here with a very, very tight stop loss. But I would want to see a confirmed breakdown with a bearish engulfing candle, typically on the 1 hour time frame, and then probably do a short position and look at the smaller time frames like 15 minutes. And that's where I would personally do. Sorry, I'm having an issue with this recording thing right here, so hopefully I can move this. I cannot. Anyways, I would do a little short position here. Yeah, I cannot pull that up. I apologize. So I would do a little short position here, set the stop loss very, very tight, and then target this range right here. And then probably after it broke this middle range, like right here around 32.5, I would set a trailing stop loss. And that's where I'd be looking to pull profits. I wouldn't do incredibly high leverage, but a lot of these small, short kind of scalp positions that I would be setting up would be adding to that long-term position at these prices, because I do think over the long run, 30K, 20K, even 10K Bitcoin, that's all times where I would personally like to be averaging into this asset. Beyond this, we have the overall crypto markets, obviously seeing a lot of red. Today, things are a bit flat, to be honest, but over the past 7 days, I mean, there's been extreme fear, like I talked about in the beginning of this video. But yeah, I mean, I'm still holding my positions. I've sold a little bit of some of mine for a little bit of tax loss harvesting for the end of the year. But beyond that, I mean, a lot of these I'm picking up for a little bit better prices. I think things like Solana and a lot of these projects that I've been talking about are still in profit since when I originally talked about them. So, take with that what you will. I do think Ethereum will probably drop down a bit more as kind of fear increases. But beyond this, I did want to touch on a couple last things here when it comes to kind of natural resources and commodity markets, things to look out for. So Turkey hits is hit by an unprecedented power outage as Iran halts gas flow. So this is just one example of the whole Russia and Europe situation, kind of on a bit of a smaller level. But I think this is quite interesting because a lot of people kind of take these things for granted. We take for granted our devices, probably what you're watching this on, at the end of the day, these things are not promised to us, right? So there's natural resources and commodities that we need to power these things. For example, probably what you're watching this on, you need lithium for, right? Lithium is a very important play. Turkey's hit by this. I've talked about Iran is why I like investing in Iran personally as an emerging market country. I think the stock market there, if you can gain exposure to it, is quite interesting because a lot of companies are trading at extremely low price to earnings ratios versus the rest of the world where everything is over leveraged. So beyond this, let's go here. Let's see. So this article talks about Germany's reliance on Russian gas limits and Europe's option in the Ukraine crisis. Again, this is kind of that playing card that I think Russia will probably pull out at some point in time. And it's important to understand this, really watching this trend. Beyond this, the one company in the gold mining space that I personally like, I'm not a big fan of the ETFs, but if you're looking at this, is GLDG. I mean, they've done incredibly well. They have a lot of their reserves came out in this PEA report. Right here it should be. Yeah. So preliminary economic assessment report. So this PEA report basically talks about, what are their equivalents in the ground. They're essentially valued at a lot less than the actual spot value of gold. They also hold a lot in this kind of like gold royalties companies. It's over like $100 million on their balance sheets of that company. But this report basically breaks it all down. This is one that over the next couple of years I would definitely be following pretty closely. So definitely watch out for a GLDG. And then beyond that, this is one company that I think is quite interesting. So weeks left to join in shares of the Future Joint Technology Company. So right here, they basically talk about how this is kind of going in and fixing a lot of things in the orthopedics and this whole sector where we have a lot of human error, where robotics could actually help a lot of things. So that's Monogram Orthopedics, and this is one company that I'm definitely really looking out for, especially kind of long term when we're looking at, okay, how can we use robotics in the medical field in a positive way? So that's all for this video. If you guys have any questions, any comments, let me know in the comment section down below. You can join the Telegram group, link down below in the description. Besides that, leave me comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel, stay up to date, hit the notification bell, and click all. You can follow us on Twitter at _IO, InvestGlobal, and until next time.